Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome to Link Engineering's video conversation series. I'm Shelley Latham, Community Manager of linkengineering.org. Link Engineering is an engineering educator exchange sponsored by the National Academy of Engineering and Chevron. And we have lots of resources there for K through 12 educators who are interested in incorporating engineering in their classrooms. If you aren't a member, I encourage you to check it out and join. And we've got a great newsletter, and we're on social media, and we're just trying to make connections between all these wonderful resources that are out there for engineering and educators, trying to make it a little bit easier for you to get started with engineering. Today, we are talking about Fab Labs and tapping the potential of Fab Labs with Dr. Ken Welty, who's a professor of the School of Education at the University of Wisconsin-Stout. And he teaches instructional methods courses for technology and science education at the undergraduate level and research methods and program evaluation at the graduate level. And his work includes evaluating the treatment of engineering in STEM curricula for the National Academy of Engineering and investigating students' conceptions of technology and engineering. And he is joined today with a frequent collaborator, Laurence Charlier. Laurence, I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing that right. We talked about a lot of things, but not that. So you're going to correct me in a minute, I'm sure. He is Fab Lab director and technical expert at Northwestern High School in Wisconsin. He's a technology and engineering teacher, and he's been involved with the University of Wisconsin-Stout Fab Lab since its inception and has taken advantage of opportunities to visit several Fab Labs throughout the state and done performing assessments for the UW-Stout. Okay, you guys are going to clean up that introduction because I'm sure I missed a lot. Suffice it to say, and you are in the middle of a educational opportunity, professional development for educators right now, right?
That's correct. We're currently hosting 13 teachers from throughout Wisconsin this week. And then we'll be, in a couple more weeks, we'll be entertaining another 20 teachers under the auspices of our Fab Lab retreat. We bring teachers in, we encourage them to play. Subsequently, we hope for some discovery, and then ultimately a change in practice.
Fantastic. So I'm going to turn it over to you. We have a very full program here today. Ken and Laurence are going to sort of cover soup to nuts on Fab Lab and how you can integrate it into your STEM education.
Yeah, what has happened is the idea of a Fab Lab tends to mean different things to different people. Its original inception came from MIT. And there was a discovery there that digital fabrication tools can be used to make almost anything. And those tools are reasonably affordable. They're kind of quick. They kind of take foggy ideas about something and they aid the designer, the student, the entrepreneur in bringing their ideas to fruition. We kind of like to think of Fab Labs as that which happens before you're invited to be on Shark Tank. Now, what has happened is these facilities are very attractive to teachers and to schools and to administrators from an aesthetic point of view. Everybody wants one for their school, that they tend to be very impressive places that thoughtful educators see as having tremendous potential. But one of the things that we've discovered is when you get past the glitz and the glamour and the installation of it all, there's a lot of educators who are kind of confused as to how they might actually use it. So over time, teachers have been contacting UW Stout with a rather pervasive question. And that question is now that we have a Fab Lab, what should we be doing with it? And what we've detected is there tends to be a focus on the Fab Lab itself as curriculum. That there's a curriculum embedded somewhere in all these tools. And what are the recipes for using these tools? So in the Fab Lab story, a lot of schools are starting with the Fab Lab being chapter 1 in that story. Our approach is quite different. What we would argue is that the Fab Lab's probably chapter 8. When you think about the Fab Lab as chapter 1, it's a little bit like an English teacher asking students, find a famous poem online. Bring that poem up on your screen, change the name of the author to your own, and print it off and turn it in for a grade. Fab Labs are essentially collections of printers. In contrast to being a Kinko's for wedding invitations and reports and architectural drawings, we have a Kinko's in our building that deals with three-dimensional media. And that Kinko's in our building is full of tools for printing three-dimensional objects. And it's often useful to think about the Fab Lab as just being a collection of wonderful printers. So then the question becomes, is what's worth printing? And that's where the idea that Fab Labs is probably chapter 8 in a story about design and engineering. That an English teacher would ask the students to compose a poem, or in more contemporary terms, compose lyrics for a song. And then with that product in mind, print it off so that the student can conduct kind of a reading of their poem or their music lyrics. What we've done is we've thought in terms of posing authentic problems from the world outside of school, bringing them into the classroom and putting them before young people, and have them go through an intellectual journey that takes a foggy idea through a process of iteration that ultimately culminates in a rather mature design that the student can articulate, and the student can defend, and the student can promote. So it's all good fun.
Yeah, that's great. And you touched on a lot of big ideas there. And so we're going to, I want you to maybe describe a little bit for me the difference between a Fab Lab and Maker. Like, just
right.
Because I think that can be confusing to people, and I don't want to get you too far off track, but I think it might be helpful to make a distinction, right up front.
Well, and at the risk of oversimplifying it, we basically have two movements going on. The Maker movement, to my understanding, was inspired by a desire to engage kids in the act of making, because in their digital world, they're not making models. They're not playing with construction paper as much as they did. They're preoccupied with their tablet. They're preoccupied with phones. Educators started seeing a need to kind of tap into the imagination of a child, to engage that child in creative thought that culminates a representation of their ideas about a particular topic. And of course, teachers, especially at the elementary level, saw this as a way to kind of bring a cart into their classroom that had all sorts of useful toys on it, and materials, and to integrate the idea of making into their curriculum. So if we're studying insects in a biology class, the making opportunity is to replicate the anatomy of many insects, to think about their form and function, to translate their understanding of the form and function of the anatomy of an insect into a model insect. And that model insect would be made out of styrofoam balls and pipe cleaners, and the young people would define it as a particular species. They can give it their own name and describe how that particular bug that they created is unique and thus worthy of being a new species of bug. So that's kind of a maker thing. At the same time, running parallel to that was this discovery that there's these wonderful digital fabrication tools that in the digital world, we can transform ideas into physical products that can feed the mind relative to this could be better if this turned out better than I thought because, and it's kind of exciting. I would take the maker movement and the Fab Lab movement and think of them as two extremes on one continuum. That what makes a Fab Lab a piece of this, one end of the continuum, is the fact that it's very dependent on these digital fabrication tools. And in a digital fabrication world, we kind of expect a certain amount of knowledge to be brought to bear, a certain amount of maturity, a certain amount of experience. Whereas the maker movement is dealing with the idea of the creative nature of kids, the imagination of kids, the use of rather simple media, and that it's something that can be easily launched with preschool kids. And some might argue we can do something with Fab Lab with preschool kids too. But I'm just pointing out that these are two ideas that are more the same than they are different. Mm-hmm. They do have kind of a distinction relative to their sophistication, that when they're brought together, they probably represent kind of a continuum of sophistication, with digital fabrication at one end and making and imagining and inventing at the other end. And basically they have those themes in common throughout.
That's great. I'm going to share the screen again.
Sure.
Okay, so let's just touch on briefly on the equipment features. What is kind of a basic standard for a Fab Lab, or is a Fab Lab with just one piece of equipment, or is, walk me through the equipment features.
The MIT model actually had a recommended list of resources that needed to be in the room for it to be a genuine Fab Lab. And some of the basic ingredients to live up to the inspiration of MIT was a laser engraver, a 3D modeling capability. Vinyl cutters are a classic piece of it. CNC, either routers or little milling machines, both of which can be reasonably tabletop, or they could be quite large. Plasma cutters is basically another rather large tool that, in contrast to using a laser, it's using a plasma cutter, but it's an awful lot like a laser, only bigger, and it likes steel. And the laser cutter, of course, wood, leather, plastic, paper, and works quite well. There are probably some other things on the MIT recommended list, but I'm going to turn it over to my colleague here, and I'll ask him to kind of describe, how do you get started from the point of view of a teacher in a building? Do we have to play by MIT rules, or can we just make a strategic purchase and get this thing off the ground, win the favor of stakeholders, solicit more resources, and take it to the next level.
Okay.
Well, hi, Laurence. Certainly, yes, an additional piece of equipment there that Fab Lab MIT recommendation is a vinyl cutter.
Yeah, I had mine.
Oh, you did.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you got it all covered. Go figure.
Yeah.
No, so Fab Lab, those are the typical pieces within most of the Fab Labs that I got to tour in Wisconsin. In fact, the one here at UW South was set up basically off of that very list. Really though, in order to have a Fab Lab and to begin entertaining these ideas with design and an iterative process to go through to present project-based lessons, the most powerful, and in fact, you could probably get by just with laser engravers on that list. So the problem being they're awfully expensive. So having being able to write grants, Wisconsin is they've recognized the importance and potential of Fab Labs for education, and have created initiatives through the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation to set up grants to, I think it was some 21 schools, I think, 21 or 22, who were able to submit proposals, equipment, and had a matching fund grant for up to $50,000 for each school.
Right.
And you'll find with that kind of equipment, $50,000, it goes pretty far, but it won't take you all the way there.
No.
So in fact, the best plans that we saw were sort of scaffolded long-term plans that started with certain pieces of equipment. Ideally, the laser is a good place to start, and then adding capability as you move forward.
What was interesting here at UW Stout, the Wisconsin Economic Development Board was interested in investing in schools and the development of these Fab Labs. And one of the things they wanted before they started writing checks was, what is going on out there in Wisconsin? How are teachers using these things? And they commissioned a study, and that study was orchestrated by UW Stout, and it involved visiting a lot of schools, interviewing a lot of teachers, conducting several focus groups. And over a course of a year, one of the outcomes of that study was schools are all over the place. Some see it as an extension of Maker, some see it as a potential for informal education, some of it see it as workforce development, some see it as an opportunity for career and technical education, some people see it as STEM. They were just all over the place. One of the things they also did is they used Baldrige methodology and Baldrige quality criteria to look at these programs. And what was interesting is the program that they found in Wisconsin that had the most merit, that was the richest and the most pedagogically sound, was in Brillion, Wisconsin, and a little town on the east side of the state, and a rather nationally renowned teacher named Steve Meyer. And he was shocked and surprised to find out that his facility was identified as the best Fab Lab. It was news to him that he even had a Fab Lab. And in reality, what the Baldrige criteria uncovered, and what the various stakeholders that reviewed these programs unleashed, was the fact that he was taking students on a journey through design, and that design process, that intellectual adventure that kind of runs parallel to what it means to learn something, culminated in an object that came off of a laser engraver, and that was the primary tool that he was using. It was the workhorse of his program, and it was a rather modest machine, and it showed the most wear of any machine in the school, and it was the story that led up to the print activity. That captured the attention of business leaders, engineers, educators, and so on. So starting with a laser engraver is pretty powerful.
And just what is the price range on a laser engraver?
They're getting cheaper. Fortunately, it's not as confusing to buy a laser engraver as it is, let's say, a 3D printer. There's basically two companies that kind of dominate. One was Universal, and the other company is Epilogue. Most people will talk about them as being kind of a Ford-Chevy kind of comparison. They're more the same than they are different. They have little features about them that make them a preference for one teacher versus another. We're finding that schools tend to buy more laser engraver than they need. They put off buying it because they want to buy this big thing, a 40-watt laser engraver that can accommodate a piece of plastic from a lumber yard that's used for storm window stock for houses and apartments. That is 18 by 24. And so I can literally go to a Home Depot, go to a rack in the back of the store, buy a piece of 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch acrylic. I'm gonna walk out the door with an 18 by 24 piece. I can drop that into a $15,000 laser engraver, and I'm off and running.
Sarah in the chat said that Dremel has just come out with a small laser cutter engraver that she finds impressive and costs just $6,000. So
that's
yeah,
correct. That's
yeah.
correct.
So there's a range.
They're right, and that's the what has happened. Of course, is you have these two products that are dominating the market, and so the task for anybody who wants to enter that market space is they've got to respond to cheaper. And cheaper usually leads to smaller, and they tend to have a little less power. The warning I would give classroom teachers is to beware of the cheaper laser engravers that are essentially knockoffs from China. So if you're interested in acquiring a particular tool, I would talk to a lot of peers in the trenches. Teachers are using them on a day-to-day basis. I would focus on classroom teachers who are using them very heavily, especially with middle school kids. You know, what brand has survived a middle school classroom with this thing running basically all day long? And then I would be interested in tapping into tech support. You know, I'd find out how good's the tech support. And then I'd also be somewhat inclined to buy something that has a track record. I wouldn't be real super anxious to buy the Dremel until I know 10 people who have one.
Yeah.
And it survived the litmus test of 24 8th graders.
Duly noted. I'm sure that has crossed the mind of many a school teacher, durability, and perhaps not the first thing on the minds of the laser cutter designers.
Well, one other consideration,
for sure.
fume extraction
Yes.
becomes an issue pretty immediately. And with the larger machines, there's larger requirements. So something like 500 CFM fume extraction, depending on where you are. And it has to be vented well outside the building, especially if you're burning plastics, things like that, if you're laser engraving or cutting. So it has to be vented outside, and could carry like a $10,000 price tag pretty easily.
It can, yeah. But it's essentially, the challenge is essentially the same as installing a dryer in a house. You know, we have to get a hose, and we got to get a vent, and we have to have access to the outside. So in terms of sophistication, that's as complicated as it gets. Unfortunately, in public education, something even that simple can often be rather expensive.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I'm going to share the screen again for a second. I want to jump into the engineering aspect, because you talk about, you know, creating that journey before you get to the fabricated item, and how important that is, and how important that is to using your Fab Lab for meaningful experience. And by meaningful, I Well, how would you define meaningful Fab Lab experience?
All right. I would suspect that we have somewhat of a novel perspective on that. One of our discoveries over the last few years is there's value in entertaining the notion of engaging kids in seemingly simple design problems. One of our litmus tests is if we start with an idea for student engagement that doesn't appear to be worth doing, we might be on the right track. Now let me explain what we mean by that. John Dewey, famous educational philosopher, once basically said, the purpose of school is to prepare young people for common life. Unfortunately, schools are hostile to his words, situations of everyday life, that schools are rather artificial places. And they're very unlike what life and work and learning looks like outside of school. So his recommendation to teachers and under the auspices of progressivism was to take situations of everyday life and bring them into the classroom where students can confront those problems in a very safe environment where they can make mistakes and be insulated from consequences. So our inclination is to start with what's important in young people's lives. And if you spend any time at all in a public school building, one of the more pervasive things one sees in the hallway is young people wearing earbuds linked to a phone that's playing music. And earbuds seem to be everywhere in the building, and they're draped around kids' necks. They're hidden in pockets and so on. So an idea that we started with to play with was the idea of earbuds can be kind of a pricey investment. They can easily be $20 for something worth listening to. Yet they're very delicate. That shoving it in your pocket and pulling it out of your pocket can put a lot of tension on the wire connections between the earbuds and the jack. How can we design a device that organizes, stores, and protects earbuds? And my inclination was to go to YouTube and what are people's ideas about protecting their earbuds, organizing their earbuds, storing their earbuds? And what one will discover is there's hundreds of videos. And most of them have to do with young people coming up with all sorts of clever ways of what I call finger choreography. They'll wrap it around, they'll have this very complex recipe for how to wind it around your fingers so that you can pull it off and then fasten it up. And then when you want to use it, you can just pull on two ends and it comes undone. And they're wonderful and they're cute, but they're kind of complex. The other thing one will discover is lots of creative people have confronted this problem head on. So you can find a video that deals with how to turn a gift card, a spent gift card, with a pair of scissors into a device that will store and protect earbuds. So as an educator, I have proof of concept. It's out there. This is a real problem. Clever people have taken it on head on. That there are adolescent ways of solving this problem that have intrinsic flaws. Well, I'm going to present an adolescent way to solve the problem and have kids identify the intrinsic flaws of finger choreography, and then challenge them. There's got to be a better way, you know. Isn't there some way we can make a device to do this for us, and present that to the kids? One of the things we're interested in young people doing is defining the problem in very operational terms. And I've already let the cat out of the bag. At the end of a YouTube video and a class discussion about the nature of earbuds and how they get tangled and such, the problem would become organize, lots of cord, store, you know, it's got a place to go now, and be protected. And then the next thing would be to think about specs. You know, what are the specifications the final solution has to have in order to actually solve the problem? Well, it turns out it needs to secure the earbud piece itself. We're pretty clear about that, so we can put that on the list. It needs to kind of, see, I'm tangled here, but it needs, oh, we're going to have a knot in this, but anyway, the idea. That's what happens when I don't use this tool. I got knotted cords. The really annoying bit is this process has to end, you know, with a way to protect the jack. Well, it turns out I got a little slot here that I can kind of stuff this in. So this was an adult response, the Sunday evening run through at the dining room table in preparation for Monday morning reality after attendance has been taken. And it was inspired by the YouTube video on how to turn a credit card into an earbud thing. And it's all kind of cute. There's a series of specifications. It has to secure the earbuds. It has to secure the jack. It has to organize the cord. Another spec one might add to it is it needs to be fastenable to a belt loop or to a backpack from an adolescent point of view. It should fit in pants pockets. Then the next step in our process is, we have to gather some information. If we're going to meet these specs, we have to know some things. How big are earbud pieces? Well, it turns out they're multitude of dimensions. What shape are the earbud jacks? Some are 90-degree orientation and some of them are in line. How long is the cord? Because the length of the cord has implications for the dimensions of the device. Because, like I said, it has to end in a predictable way. Are there any of these things out in the market? And the answer, of course, is yes, there are. And what do they cost? What are their merits? And that leads us into our next phase of instruction, which is to engage kids in reverse engineering. One of the things educators like to do is engage kids in original problems. The reality is most engineers are in the business of making something 2% better. Can we make it cheaper? Can we make it faster? Can we make it stronger? Can we make it lighter? Can we add a feature that didn't have before to deal with global competition? So engineers work very hard dealing with the details of tweaking. They're in the tweaking business. They don't really start with original problems. Most of their work, I'm told, is overwhelmingly redesign, improvement. It seemed to us that if we start with a seemingly simple problem, that we could engage kids in analyzing existing solutions. And the merit of that from a pedagogical point of view is we're asking the kids to build their own knowledge for solving a problem through a very concrete activity that helps them cope with the abstraction of the larger task of designing a solution to a problem. One of the things we discovered is Amazon is a wonderful source for goofy little solutions to problems that can be bought relatively cheaply, can arrive rather quickly, can be played with at the dining room table on a Sunday evening to anticipate what young people might do with it on a Monday morning. One of the things that we discovered is no matter what you buy off Amazon, when kids start comparing these things, they find opportunities to make it better.
Oh.
Yeah. There's always, well, I don't like this one because. Well, I like this one because. Well, what if it had this? And then all of a sudden, there's an opportunity to design a device. And usually when the kids have gathered all those ideas and have all this inspiration from that which already exists, they're ready to draw some thumbnail sketches, to build basically a model of their solution graphically. And then we can move into making a model that's out of cardboard. And then we can move into making a model that's essentially a prototype. And that's where the value of the Fab Lab really comes in. It can do all those tasks very quickly, relatively inexpensively, except for the infrastructure, of course. But all these little quick experiences feed the mind. The kids are seeing their ideas come to fruition. The iterative process inspires more thinking, critiquing, modifying. And if you think about it, it runs parallel to how people construct knowledge. It's very constructivist in nature. So it's kind of exciting. Now, this is my rehearsal for my own, approaching this at the age of 62 and doesn't even own earbuds. I'm going to turn it over to Laurence to kind of explain to you what would happen when kids have this problem.
Certainly, and the Fab Lab is just using a design process to approach problems. It has so many opportunities for fun, and I don't know if that's coming true, but with just you unleash some kids' creativity, and even if their solution may not be the solution you chose, and heck, it might not even work, but if they can explain their rationale and then recognize why it didn't work and be able to move forward, then there was learning there. And we have a saying, it's on my board. It actually came from Steve Meyer, fail forward. So make mistakes, make them early.
Make them cheap.
Learn from them, make them cheap, and then move forward. But here's just one of the nicer, these are the earbuds here. Nicer examples that came out of one of our classes. For the earbud solution.
Inspired by what time of year?
Yes.
October and Halloween.
Yeah, exactly. But
Eighth graders and Halloween.
Beyond these final products, I find, and in fact, in my classes, I make sure that this ancillary learning that takes place, when they set out to make this, they're not thinking about, or to make other projects, they're not thinking about what they don't know. They don't know what they don't know until they're trying to wire something together, and then, hey, how does that work? What is the short lead on an LED mean? And then how do electrons work? So you get at these bigger ideas that they're pursuing, this small little trinket or project that they're working on. But all the science and math that goes in amongst it.
Yeah.
It's really...
Yeah, let me piggyback on that a little bit. If the kid was inspired by Skull and Crossbones and Halloween and made their earbud organizer, their earbud spool, a Skull and Crossbones configuration, it obviously doesn't meet spec. If one of our specs is, does it fit in jeans pockets? And what's a kid going to say? Well, no, it doesn't, but it looks cool. Does it hang from a belt loop? Yeah, and it's jewelry for my belt. Will it fit on my backpack? Yeah, and everybody gets to see it. And it's mine. It's my invention, and I think I'm going to sell these, and when can I get on Shark Tank? What's beautiful about that is a very profound idea in engineering is embedded in this solution. And that idea is trade-offs. There's no such thing as a perfect design. All design represent a balance between competing variables. With this particular student, we would hope he or she could articulate at the end of the design experience, what is the trade-off? In this particular case, the trade-off was form over function. This particular design celebrates form at the expense of function. My design celebrates function at the expense of form. It doesn't have a lot of aesthetic appeal. This one of course, would cost more to produce and would take longer to fabricate. And that, of course, in the engineering world is all about money. Most engineering work has something to do with money at some particular point in time. Then the kid has to kind of wrestle with the idea, does its cuteness overshadow, make up for the fact it's going to take a little longer and cost a little more to make? And so, well, that can be made with half the material and can cost half as much, but would anybody want one? So with a bunch of freshmen and 8th graders around, this one would be rather popular amongst young people. So it's a wonderful adventure. We have a lot of fun. And one of the things our teachers are discovering in our Fab Lab retreat is simple is complicated enough. That what you think is not worth doing, come on, you know, really, no one's going to want to do that. When you start diving in to the actual questions that emerge and the answers that have to be found and the ideas that are attached to it, seemingly simple is rather sophisticated. That simple has subtle sophistication embedded in it. And we can unleash that in a Fab Lab experience. One of the things that teachers wrestle with in a Fab Lab environment is student management. And one of the big headaches is the time it takes for certain digital processes to be completed. A device, if I were to make this on a 3D printer, here's a earbud organizer, and here's an earbud organizer. We're looking at 30 to 40 minutes of print time. On the laser engraver, we're looking at less than 2 minutes.
1 minute, 40 seconds.
Yeah, and then the beauty of it is we do it on a cardboard and test it. Where's our earbuds? Did I lose them? No, they're all wound up on here. But
doing magic tricks now. Awesome.
They're organized and they're stored and they're protected. But the point being is we can do a dry run on the cardboard before we commit.
Fail cheat.
Fail cheat.
Guys, we're going to open it up to questions in a minute because we're coming to the end of our hour. But Christy, I did ask them if they wanted to tell us what they had in their Fab Lab, and Christy has 10 3D printers.
Yeah.
But not any other equipment to go along with it.
Oh.
And so I guess in a general way, why do so many places go straight for the 3D printer rather than the laser cutter, which sounds like it's faster, it's more, can do more things with it, more materials?
Well, a lot of it is teachers are very interested in going from CAD software, computer-aided design software, to a prototype. And so the optimal printer for a piece of CAD software that is basically creating a three-dimensional model it is a 3D printer. The next thing that makes 3D printers very desirable is the fact they're relatively inexpensive. They've become more reliable and they've become a lot cheaper. What's nice about our colleague is that she bought 10 of them. Yeah, dead on. So I discourage people from trying to buy industrial grade 3D printers that can cost $20,000. Instead, buy a whole bunch of 3D printers that have stood the test of an 8th grade class, that have good technical support, and I'm not brokenhearted if I wear the silly thing out and have to replace it. So nowadays, a pretty nice 3D printer can be bought for as little as $400 or and up. So what's really neat about her solution to the problem is she's recognized the fact that the cycle time on a 3D printer is rather long. And therefore, if I'm going to do the classroom management thing correctly, I'm going to divide my class into groups. Let's say I have 10 groups, then those young people would be assigned their particular printer to use, and on their particular scheduled day, they would get on that and then see their part go from a file, a geometric entity in a computer, into a physical representation. But the tricky thing about 3D printers is the smaller the object you make, the easier it is to honor what that machine's capable of doing. You're not asking it to do more than it should. You're not using a lot of material that definitely costs money. And more importantly, the young people aren't sitting there hypnotized by this thing making all sorts of fun noises. It's essentially watching paint dry. If it's simple and the kids are watching this process, they will see changes in the mold as the product evolves in the design, and they'll be able to make some nice connections. If it's unduly complex or unduly large, it's going to spend a lot of time just doing this, and no real change will occur. So we're constantly thinking about what provides engagement. Bigger doesn't really lead to engagement that much. It just leads to more time, more money, and more wear and tear, and more supply. Engagement is make one of these. Yeah. Okay, what would you change about it? Make another one. Okay, you think you're ready for plastic? Explain to me why you're ready for plastic. You know, what's cool about your design? What's novel about your design? What's a trade-off? Okay, you earned your piece of plastic. You know, so we've gone from here to here. You're ready to go. How about another question?
Sarah asked, can you speak to the integration of the high school Fab Lab with the entire curriculum, including history, music, English, social studies, such as found at Fab Lab at MC2 High School in Cleveland? I don't know if you're familiar with that program, but I guess that's the STEAM approach, really bringing in the humanities. Do you have experience with that? What are your recommendations or your take on that?
Well, too many.
Right.
You could do an entire program on that.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
I think the Fab Lab context will support a lot, especially if you move the Fab Lab to Chapter 8 and pay attention to Chapters 1 through 7. The Fab Lab's just a collection of printers. If we embrace the idea of engineering, engineering has stories in it that are really the equivalent of Shakespeare. Shakespeare contributed to humanities insights into justice, conflict, honor, love, and war through that particular work. And it contributed to what does it mean to be a human being. The Brooklyn Bridge in New York was a monstrous human endeavor that had all sorts of stories embedded in it that speak to who we are as human beings and how we have to modify the environment, how we tailor things to our needs, how we tailor things to our wants. And the Brooklyn Bridge actually facilitated what New York is today. That prior to the Brooklyn Bridge, it was very separate subcultures in the various boroughs that were relatively isolated from one another. So that great immigration center that is New York was technologically enhanced through the making of the Brooklyn Bridge. So we have those particular stories that give us insights, not necessarily into the natural world, but into the human-made world. And since it is the human-made world, there are automatically connections to economics. There's connections to our desire for aesthetics. form and function. We have invention. We have invention that's been overlooked by our culture because the roots of that innovation was coming from women, when women didn't have the right to file a patent, and what inventions they came up with were under some male's name. And history has taught us that women have contributed to the human condition through the development of technology in extremely impressive ways. And those stories are embedded in the work of design and engineering. And when the kids are taking a particular journey from a foggy notion to a solution to a problem with dependent on math and dependent on science, there can also be a backstory. And in that backstory is readings and discussions and investigations of other people who have taken the same journey I'm taking. Nesbitt invented whiteout. And her name was Nesbitt. I don't remember her first name. But she had secretarial tasks as an occupation, making money to put food on the table. And she was haunted by how damaged typewriters became when people used ink erasers on the spool, holding the paper, and clogged the machine up. And there had to be a better way. So in her kitchen, she used milk and some other ingredients and whipped up the first jar of whiteout. And needless to say, we're all somewhat dependent on that material from time to time. And we're very thankful to Ms. Nesbitt for taking that particular journey. And that's analogous to a journey that might be design a device that will hold a cell phone. And there's all sorts of incidences where people have taken on problems like that and come up with solutions. I could keep on going, and I won't, but it's maybe we could have a whole nother program about
that. Indeed. Before we close out though, Laurence, I'm kind of curious to hear your take on that question, because I think that most people can agree that that holistic team approach is good.
I've been blessed to have worked in a team where it was done on purpose. It was done by the administrators, where there was a science teacher coupled with a technology teacher, coupled with an art teacher whose primary mission was to say, well, what is the biggest idea in art? What is the biggest idea you want to talk about in science or tech ed? And working jointly together to come up with supportive lessons along a theme. That was awesome. That was deliberate and on purpose. I found that was pretty unique as well, unfortunately. So as being, having this lab at our disposal, I find that the low-hanging fruit is to go for the art teacher first. Honestly, they have so much to offer, and it's so supportive of anything I can come up within a Fab Lab. So that's the easy one. Math teachers, honestly, although everything I do is steeped in math, it is the language we use to describe what's happening. However, getting math teachers is I was surprised, is difficult. I mean, they have a routine. Largely, they work within a department of many people and have several sections. So getting them to break free of that whole paradigm and just come and, celebrate the math that happens in everyday life, surprisingly difficult.
And the new opportunity now is math teachers are experimenting now with a particular movement that's looking at some reform to make math more meaningful to more students, is math in context. Math is often taught with what the math community calls naked numbers. Kids are crunching numbers that don't have an identity in the world beyond. Whereas in a Fab Lab context, kind of messing around with coding and making a device and putting a little programmable controller on it, we're getting into electricity, and we have to make decisions about various kinds of components. and it's very fertile ground for algebra. You really can't do the work without the algebra. But now there is a need to do the math. I have to protect an LED that's getting 6 volts. It wants 3. I have 6. I need to put a resistor in. How big does the resistor need to be? Well, I know 2 things. Can I use algebra to find the thing I don't know, how big the resistor should be? So that's exciting.
You could call it sneaky math.
It is
sneaky. I tell them that. I say, you just did math. You didn't even realize. I love it.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. Yeah, I do that quite often. Oh, look, this printed out in decimals. Oh, you have to convert that to fractions probably. You know, of course I do it on purpose.
But it's
some catch on
right.
anyway.
But it doesn't have to be 4th grade math. It's
No.
easy for it to become 4th grade math, and that turns the math teacher off. What's grade level appropriate? And when we get into mechanisms, and we get into fluids, and when we get into electricity, electronics, when we get into structures,
Mechanical advantage.
it's much easier to get into grade level appropriate. And that's why seemingly simple is kind of important. The math and the science tends to jump out at you. And when the math and science jumps out of a seemingly simple project, it tends to be grade level appropriate. Whereas if we try to do something sophisticated because we're using sophisticated tools, the math and the science is rarely grade level appropriate. So we can do this and bring trig to bear on a solution to a problem for older high school students that's grade level appropriate. It's integral to the work that's being done, and it provides a context for the math teacher that brings relevance to their curriculum.
Well, as you said, Laurence, we could do probably, you said another show. I'd say easily we could do 3 or 4. We could easily do a series on Fab Lab integration. It's really fascinating stuff, and it's very deeply satisfying. I can sense that, and I think that kids naturally like to be getting in their hands-on solving problems, using cool equipment, using interesting materials. It's very rich territory, and I want to thank you so much for just getting us started. This is really, I know, the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, absolutely.
And but there's a lot of great information, a lot of solid information. So I want to quickly answer David's question. He said, "Is there any way to show this to my fellow teachers?" And David, I will be putting a recording of this on our Link Engineering YouTube site and also at linkengineering.org. So they'll be able to watch it. You can share it, and easy to see. So I will be sending those links to those places in a follow-up email. And and I will also include links to all of the resources that we talked about today and actually didn't even get to, just some Fab Lab and Makerspace resources that you can check out. So I want to thank everybody for coming. I had a great time, and we can certainly we can certainly invite Ken and Laurence back at some point to dive in deeper into some of these areas that we just touched on. I'm going to share my screen once again just to say that if you want to see some of the other, this is part of a series. This is the 5th that we've done. You can see the other video conversations and check out what we're doing on Link Engineering if you're looking for resources and want to connect to other educators who are doing engineering at linkengineering.org. That's a project of the National Academy of Engineering and sponsored by Chevron. I want to thank Ken, Welty, and Laurence. Tell me how to pronounce your last name.
Charlier.
Charlier, I got it right.
Thank you.
Woo.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for coming. This was great, and enjoy the rest of your workshop, and keep spreading the word. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.